Hey guys, tonight, we descend straight into the molten heart of divine invention, the forge of Hephaestus. You're standing now at the edge of a massive cavern, and every breath feels like you're inhaling liquid fire. The heat presses against your skin, like an invisible hand, the glow of molten metal, turning everything golden red. Sparks fly upward, like rebellious stars escaping into the dark ceiling above. Around you, towering bellows wheeze and roar, pumping air into glowing furnaces. The clang of hammers against anvils rings like a metallic heartbeat. Molten rivers of bronze and gold snake through carefully carved channels, while divine tools hang like sleeping beasts from hooks and rafters. And then you see him, Hephaestus himself. Broad-shouldered, limping slightly, his powerful arms swinging rhythmically as he strikes glowing metal with impossible precision. His beard is singed at the tips, his tunic stained with soot, but his eyes sharp, focused, alive. He isn't simply working, he's breathing life into metal. You probably won't survive this, honestly. One misstep, one gust of infernal wind, and you'd be flash-fried into a very short, mythological footnote. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And of course, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all watching from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The forge feels alive, and in many ways, it is. This is no ordinary smithy. This is where lightning bolts are crafted for Zeus shields, molded for Achilles armor, forged for gods and heroes alike. Each creation pulses with divine energy, each hammer strike carrying not just force, but purpose. You step carefully over a polished bronze plate cooling beside the anvil. The surface gleams like liquid moonlight, etched with swirling designs that seem to shift when viewed from different angles. You feel like it's watching you back. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Greek mythology, Hephaestus was the god of fire, metalworking, and craftsmanship. While his fellow Olympians wielded power over the heaven seas or war, Hephaestus ruled over the creative fire, transforming raw elements into objects of awe and power. But here's your quirky tidbit. Unlike his radiant, beautiful siblings, Hephaestus was often described as lame, deformed, and physically imperfect, a rare portrayal of disability among the gods. Some myths even suggest Hera, his own mother, cast him off Mount Olympus at birth because of his appearance. Historians still argue whether Hephaestus's deformity was a reflection of ancient discomfort with physical imperfection, or deeper metaphor for the price of creative genius, that great skill often comes paired with great personal struggle. You watch as a pair of golden hands, yes hands, glide across the floor, carrying tools toward their master. These aren't living servants, but early glimpses of something remarkable, animated machines crafted by Hephaestus himself. Their joints click softly, their motions unnervingly smooth. The forge isn't just a place of labor, it's a laboratory. You can feel that Hephaestus isn't content with crafting mere swords or shields anymore. His mind works endlessly, turning over new possibilities, searching for better, faster, stranger ways to shape the world around him. And tonight, you'll witness one of his most astonishing achievements, one that pushes the very boundary between tool and life. The creation of golden robot servants. Because while mortals would wait thousands of years to dream up artificial intelligence and robotics, Hephaestus was already there, hammering gold into thought, breath into metal, and movement into machines. You linger near the forge, feeling the pulse of divine fire, while Hephaestus's hammer keeps striking. But behind this rhythmic creation lies a story far messier than molten bronze. You turn your gaze upwards, toward the distant spires of Mount Olympus, where his tale began, not with triumph, but with rejection. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Hephaestus was cast from Olympus, depending on which version you hear, either by his mother, Hera, for being born deformed, or by Zeus himself after one of their many celestial squabbles. Either way, he was the only Olympian god ever forcibly thrown from the heavens. You imagine the violent scene, a newborn god plummeting from Olympus's gleaming heights, falling for an entire day before crashing into the sea below. The force alone would have destroyed any mortal. But Hephaestus, he survived, broken, battered, but alive. And here's your quirky tidbit. In some versions of the myth, sea nymphs Thetis and Eurynome discovered the broken child and secretly raised him in an underwater grotto. Which means the world's greatest smith started his life not among gods, but under the waves. Historians still argue whether Hephaestus's exile is meant to explain his mastery over elemental forces, having fallen into earth, water, and fire. He alone understands how to command them. Others suggest it simply reflects the Greeks' complicated relationship with disability, depicting Hephaestus as both cursed and gifted. You glance at Hephaestus, now his slight limp, as he walks, the occasional tightness in his jaw as the weight of his tools strains his body. And yet, none of it slows him. If anything, it sharpens him. Olympus may have rejected him, but exile forged his resolve like steel under the hammer. You see the early seeds of his genius take root here, far from the polished halls of Olympus. Isolated, surrounded by raw materials and unending silence. Hephaestus did what many broken souls do. He made things. While other gods demanded offerings, he built. While others reveled in courtly feuds, he melted bronze. He didn't wield thunder or tridents. His was a quieter kind of power, one that required patience and vision. And as his skills grew, so did his creations: jewelry for the goddesses, weapons for mortal heroes, and intricate devices for Olympus itself. Even the famed throne of Hera, which trapped her as revenge for casting him down, was one of his early marvels. But this was just the beginning. You feel it even now watching him work. The ordinary forge cannot contain what's brewing in his mind. Because soon Hephaestus won't just shape objects, he'll shape life itself, giving form to metal that can think, move, and obey. You step back slightly as another of his mechanical creations glides by a small golden tripod with spindly legs balancing a tray of glowing embers. Its movement is smooth, eerily organic. It wobbles for a moment, self-corrects, then continues on its mission as if alive. And you realize this god cast down, broken, unwanted, has quietly begun building a world where life and machine blur. A world where even the gods themselves will marvel or fear what he's about to unleash. Because up next, you'll witness Hephaestus fully embrace his gift as the master of divine craftsmanship. And you'll see how his loneliness fuels a genius unlike anything Olympus has ever seen. You take a few cautious steps deeper into the forge, as if walking through a living thing, one that breathes fire sweats, molten gold, and hums with the pulse of invention. The air is heavy with metal and smoke, but beneath the surface burns something even hotter: Hephaestus's genius. Now you witness what sets him apart, not just from mortals, but even from his fellow gods. While Zeus controls storms, Poseidon commands seas, and Athena shapes wisdom, Hephaestus creates. Not just weapons or ornaments, but entire marvels that defy nature itself. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the myths, Hephaestus crafted many of the most legendary objects in both mortal and divine history. Achilles' invulnerable shield, Hermes' winged helmet, Apollo's golden chariot, and even Pandora herself, shaped from clay, breathed into life by his hands. You watch him now, twisting heated bronze into thin filigree spirals so fine they seem spun from light itself. Sparks shower his anvil like shooting stars. Every strike of his hammer is measured precise, almost surgical. Even gods stop to marvel at his work. And here's your quirky tidbit. Some myths claim that Hephaestus even made mechanical chairs, doors, and tripods for Olympus that rolled themselves into position, much to the amusement and occasional unease of the other gods. Yes, automated divine furniture. Even Mount Olympus had early smart home tech. Historians still argue whether these tales reflect early Greek fascination with mechanical automation or are simply exaggerated poetic flourishes. Some suggest the Greeks had limited but real exposure to primitive automata, self-opening temple doors, water-powered mechanisms, even simple moving statues. Hephaestus was the divine embodiment of that emerging wonder. You observe as another golden tripod marches past on its own stubby legs, perfectly balancing a steaming goblet. It pauses, pivots, and glides toward a workbench before locking itself into place. The fluidity of its movement unnerves you. There's nothing clunky or rigid about it. And this is where you begin to understand Hephaestus' deeper obsession. His creations are not mere tools, they're extensions of himself. Unlike his divine kin who rely on their natural gifts, Hephaestus builds what he lacks. He creates perfection, where his body carries imperfection. Even now, you sense the loneliness curling around him like smoke. The other gods hold court on Olympus, basking in glory and adoration. But Hephaestus works alone, soot on his face, the hiss of cooling metal, his only applause. You spot another of his inventions, small, glittering mechanical birds perched along the rafters. Heads twitching, their metallic feathers catching the firelight. Every few moments, one spreads its wings, flutters in place, then settles again. They seem to watch him too, like loyal guardians born of his mind. And as his mastery grows, so does his ambition. The chairs, the tripods, the mechanical animals, these are practice runs. What he truly seeks is something far greater, not just animated metal, but servants that resemble life itself. Artificial beings that serve his will, respond to commands, and stand beside him, not as mockeries, but as companions. You realize now this isn't about convenience. This is about filling a void Olympus never could. The god who is cast away now dreams of creating life that cannot abandon him. And to do that, he'll push even the divine limits of craftsmanship. The first sparks of what we might today call artificial intelligence flicker here, not in labs or computer code, but in the molten pools of a god's lonely forge. And the next steps he takes will lead him directly toward his most audacious inventions, golden robot servants that think, speak, and serve. And you're about to watch him take that first leap. The hammer falls silent for a moment. Hephaestus stands still, eyes narrowed, as if wrestling with something far heavier than metal. His brow furrows not from exhaustion, but from vision. You can feel it in the air, now the gods may rule Olympus. But here in this fiery chamber, something new is taking shape. Something they have never seen before. You glance toward the shadows, where you sense the echoes of Olympus's many feuds curling like smoke around Hephaestus's work. Because as much as his forge burns from within, it's the dysfunction of the gods above that fuels his deepest creations. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Greek gods were anything but harmonious. Their endless quarrels, betrayals, and rivalries played out like a divine soap opera affairs. Jealousies shifting alliances, each feeding the mythic landscape in which Hephaestus toiled. You recall how Zeus cheated on Hera. Hera plotted revenge. Athena feuded with Poseidon. Ares stirred conflict, and nearly everyone betrayed nearly everyone else. At some point, the Olympians were immortal, yes, but they were far from stable. And here's your quirky tidbit. At one point, Hephaestus himself trapped his mother Hera in a mechanical throne that ensnared her arms and legs, paralyzing her, until the other gods begged for her release. Hephaestus eventually freed her, but only after securing his place back on Olympus. That was negotiation forge style. Historians still argue whether this recurring dysfunction among the gods reflects ancient Greek views of family life power dynamics, or even their understanding of fate. Some scholars see these stories as allegories for the chaos of politics and personal relationships woven into their everyday lives. You watch Hephaestus now pulling fresh gold ingots from a chest, his limp more pronounced as the weight strains his leg. The gods might command armies or dictate justice, but they cannot forge what he can. and they cannot stop what he's about to create. Because, unlike the other gods, who rely on mortal worshippers or divine authority, Hephaestus seeks control not through domination, but through design. If his place among the gods remains uncertain, then he will make companions who never betray him creatures without jealousy, politics, or ambition. Servants who exist to serve perfect by nature, tireless, flawless. You notice a small prototype resting on a nearby table. A golden arm, its fingers jointed like human ones, each digit crafted with unbelievable precision. He lifts it gently, inspecting the way the knuckles flex smoothly beneath his calloused fingertips. Not a tool, a limb. You feel the tension rising, as if the very forge itself holds its breath. What Hephaestus is imagining goes beyond hammers and tripods now. He's no longer content with simple moving parts. He wants beings, metal bodies that move with grace, obey with intelligence, and function like living creatures. You sense another layer beneath his ambition, revenge. A god who was discarded because of physical imperfection now dreams of building perfect physical forms, golden beings unmarred by his own limp, and their movements elegant where his are labored. Where the Olympians mocked his body, his creations will transcend it. You overhear him muttering softly as he sketches designs into molten wax with a metal stylus. They will not tire, they will not err, they will not betray. And you realize how the god's dysfunction has quietly driven him here, not just to heal his own isolation, but to surpass the flawed immortals who rejected him. Soon the molten gold will cool, the gears will turn, the joints will flex. And when his first golden servant rises, shimmering and obedient, Olympus will witness a new kind of life, one no god but Hephaestus could have ever conceived. And that moment is coming next. The forge hisses as molten gold flows into intricately carved molds, each one shaped not for weapons or tools, but for limbs, torsos, and faces. You stand now at the edge of the divine breakthrough. Hephaestus, alone in his volcanic workshop, is breathing life into metal. You watch his hands work with astonishing speed and precision, as though guided by instinct rather than thought. The delicate joints of wrists, elbows, and knees take shape beneath his hammer. Neck vertebrae forged from interlocking rings of gold click smoothly into alignment. Fingers taper into fine, graceful digits, capable of movement so natural they almost seem flesh. Here's your mainstream historical fact. According to Homer and Hesiod, Hephaestus created golden automatons, artificial beings designed to serve him within his forge. These living statues could walk, think, and perform complex tasks long before the idea of robots entered modern thought. You glance over at one nearly complete creation, standing upright on a marble slab. It gleams under the forge's glow, catching every flicker of light across its perfectly sculpted form. Neither masculine nor feminine, it carries a strange, uncanny beauty. Human enough to unsettle, machine enough to impress. Here's your quirky tidbit. The myths describe these servants as not just mobile, but intelligent. They could anticipate commands, adapt to their master's needs, and even converse. Essentially, Hephaestus created the first autonomous assistants centuries before anyone would coin terms like machine learning or artificial intelligence. Historians still argue whether these tales represent pure myth or reflect ancient Greek curiosity about early mechanical automation. Some suggest that temple devices, hydraulic doors, moving statues, even primitive automata may have sparked these grander myths about self-moving beings crafted by the gods. You watch now as Hephaestus carefully installs tiny flexible tubes inside the automaton's torso channels for liquid metal that will simulate muscle tension and fluid motion. It's not unlike a circulatory system, but instead of blood, these beings will pulse with molten gold. Each segment locks together seamlessly. Shoulders rotate, knees flex. The head, shaped with serene almond-shaped eyes, turns slowly as if already observing its surroundings. The effect is both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. And yet, this is not magic. This is divine engineering, each joint perfectly calculated, each mechanism designed with obsessive care. The gods wield lightning and war, but Hephaestus commands complexity. Where others rely on chaos, he controls precision. You notice something else now, a strange kind of tenderness. As he fits the final chest plate into place, his touch lingers briefly, almost fatherly. These are not just tools. They're his creations, his companions, his answer to centuries of rejection. You hear him whisper under his breath, "You will serve faithfully. You will never mock me. You will not abandon me." The golden servant's eyes flash faintly as its systems activate. A soft hum rises from within as its head tilts smoothly, acknowledging its creator for the first time. Its lips part slightly, and though no words escape yet, it breathes artificial breath, but breath nonetheless. Hephaestus steps back, chest heaving, not from fear, but from awe. You can feel the shift in the forge's atmosphere. This isn't just another creation. This is different. A golden being that bridges the gap between life and machine, between servant and child. And even as this first servant stabilizes, you notice several more molds waiting nearby, each one a slightly different form, optimized for specific tasks. Some designed for heavy lifting, others for delicate assembly, still others for serving at divine banquets. Hephaestus isn't stopping with one. He's building an entire population. But with this creation comes something more profound than utility, the beginning of divine unease. Because while mortals might marvel, not every god will be comfortable with what Hephaestus has built. The line between craftsmanship and hubris is thin, and these golden servants blur it dangerously. And very soon, you'll see how the other gods react to these shimmering, obedient marvels, and how Hephaestus' lonely forge quietly challenges Olympus itself. The forge no longer hums, it whispers. The first golden servant stands fully assembled, its polished surface, reflecting every flicker of flame. Hephaestus circles it slowly, his limp, forgotten for the moment eyes gleaming with satisfaction. But even as this one breathes its silent artificial breath, he's already preparing for the next. You watch the god gather more ingots as though the single creation has only whetted his appetite. Because now that the impossible has been done, there's no reason to stop. Why create one perfect being when you can build many? Here's your mainstream historical fact. The golden servants of Hephaestus weren't singular. The myths describe multiple automatons in his workshop, a veritable army of tireless workers who maintained his forge, prepared his tools, and even served him during Olympus's grand feasts. The second servant rises, neck slightly broader shoulders, thicker joints designed for heavier lifting. Its golden arms flex with quiet precision as it takes its first autonomous step. The soft clink of its metal foot on the stone floor is oddly delicate, almost reverent. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some myths suggest Hephaestus's automatons had different personalities or specialties. A few were designed for intricate embroidery and weaving, others for carrying trays of nectar or repairing broken machinery. In a way, he was creating specialized robots centuries before humans dreamed of industrial assembly lines or manufacturing bots. Historians still argue whether these highly individualized automatons were purely myth or if they reflect something more experimental in early Greek engineering. Some speculate that these stories may have been inspired by primitive automata, displayed in temples, simple moving statues powered by hidden gears, steam, or water pressure. You step aside as one servant glides toward a molten channel, delicately pouring liquid metal into a mold under Hephaestus's silent direction. Its movements are fluid, as though it has always known what to do. The other follows, adjusting bellows and arranging tools with almost eerie anticipation. Hephaestus no longer needs mortal apprentices, nor fears mistakes born of human fatigue. These golden creations don't complain. They don't tire. They don't age. They work in perfect synchrony, beautiful silent extensions of his will. And yet, you sense something beneath the triumph, a flicker of obsession. This isn't only about convenience. The god who was once mocked and abandoned now surrounds himself with beings that will never judge him. Every flawless golden face reflects back not Olympus's cruelty, but his own mastery. You catch Hephaestus whispering again, almost as if speaking to himself. They will never cast me down. You understand now that these golden robots are more than servants. They are armor for his heart. Companionship forged from metal loyalty, hammered into gold. But these creations aren't limited to the smoky forge. Hephaestus envisions a world where his golden attendants serve far beyond his hidden workshop. Why stop at the forge when Olympus itself could be filled with perfect, tireless assistants? And soon, that's exactly what he will do. Because these glittering beings will follow him into the grand halls of Olympus, turning divine heads, stirring both awe and unease among the gods who once exiled him. The question, of course, is whether even gods are ready for what Hephaestus has unleashed. And next, you'll see him march his shining servants straight into Olympus's feasts and into the gods' uneasy gaze. The flames of the forge fade behind you now as you follow Hephaestus out of his volcanic workshop, the rhythmic clanking of golden feet trailing him like a metallic drumbeat. His golden attendants march with eerie synchronization, gleaming like miniature suns as they ascend the long path toward Olympus. You feel the shift in the air as you near the god's shining palace, less smoke, more polished marble, and ivory columns stretching into the sky. Birds sing somewhere above, and cool mountain breezes replace the furnace heat you've grown used to. But the golden servants don't falter. Their feet touch marble steps with perfect precision. Their heads turn subtly, scanning the pathways ahead like guards or scouts. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The myths describe Hephaestus's golden servants not simply as workshop assistants, but as fully mobile attendants who followed him wherever he went, including Olympus itself. They weren't confined to his forge. They were present during grand banquets, councils, and even divine ceremonies. You watch as the Olympian gods begin to take notice. The golden figures glide silently into the palace halls, trays balanced perfectly, urns of nectar and ambrosia carried without a drop spilled. Some gods stare with open curiosity. Others exchange uneasy glances. And here's your quirky tidbit. According to some versions of the myth, Hephaestus's golden automatons were even capable of speech. They could hold conversations, greet guests, and deliver messages on his behalf, more than simple tools, but not quite independent minds. Essentially, they were ancient voice assistants. Only you know with legs. Historians still argue whether these speaking automatons were purely symbolic, reflecting the gods' craftsmanship, or whether they hint at ancient Greek philosophical speculation on artificial life and early fascination with what it means to simulate not just movement, but consciousness itself. You watch Aphrodite, Hephaestus's wife, and often his greatest heartache, eye the glittering servants with a mixture of intrigue and discomfort. Even for a goddess used to beauty, their flawless gold forms seem unnatural. Perfect bodies without emotion, loyal yet hollow. The golden attendants present goblets to Zeus himself, who chuckles as one offers him a flawless pour. Tireless servants, he mutters, eyes twinkling. Even my cupbearer could learn a thing or two. Hera, however, narrows her eyes, saying nothing. You sense the tension beneath Olympus's polished surface. The other gods, powerful as they are, aren't sure whether to admire Hephaestus's work or fear it. Because while the forge god may lack their charm, or might he now wield something more unsettling, the ability to replicate aspects of life itself? And that raises dangerous questions. If gods can forge lifelike servants, what separates creation from creator? What distinguishes God from machine? What happens if these artificial beings evolve beyond their commands? You catch Athena, goddess of wisdom, observing closely. She studies the golden attendants with clinical interest, perhaps recognizing that Hephaestus has crossed into a realm even she has not fully explored, the divine frontier of automation design and imitation of life. Here's your fringe debate. Some modern scholars argue that these myths foreshadow humanity's timeless fascination and anxiety with creating life from non-life. The golden servants embody an ancient form of the questions we still ask today about artificial intelligence, robotics, and the ethics of creation. As you stand amid the banquet, the golden attendants continue their flawless service, never tired, never clumsy, never distracted. The gods drink, feast, and whisper among themselves. Some admire, some mock, a few grow nervous. But none can deny the unsettling brilliance of what Hephaestus has brought into their midst. And even now, in their perfection, you sense the paradox growing beneath Hephaestus's achievement. Because though his golden servants move with grace, they do not fill the emptiness they were meant to cure. They obey, but they do not love. They serve, but they do not comfort. Hephaestus has solved the problem of loyalty, but not the problem of loneliness. And very soon you'll see how that paradox begins to haunt even the master of the forge himself. You leave the polished marble halls behind and return with Hephaestus to the quiet of his forge. The golden servants follow feet, clicking rhythmically, faces forever, frozen in polite, obedient serenity. But behind their gleaming exteriors, something ancient stirs a myth far older than even Olympus itself. Because while Hephaestus perfected his golden attendants, the idea of artificial life wasn't entirely his invention. He had a prototype, a guardian, a giant, a warning. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Long before the golden servants of Olympus, Hephaestus was credited with creating Talos, a massive bronze automaton who patrolled the shores of Crete. Talos was one of the earliest myths of artificial life, an autonomous, nearly indestructible being built entirely of metal. You step now onto the rocky shores of Crete, the sun blazing overhead. Far in the distance, you spot him, a towering figure of polished bronze, reflecting the sunlight like a walking lighthouse. Talos strides along the coast, encircling the island, endlessly vigilant against foreign invaders. Here's your quirky tidbit. According to some versions of the myth, Talos wasn't just mindless muscle. He could recognize enemies, pick up boulders to hurl at approaching ships, and even heat his entire bronze body red hot to incinerate attackers. Think of him as an ancient one-man homeland security system, terrifyingly efficient and very flammable. Historians still argue whether Talos represents pure mythology or reflects early Greek encounters with basic mechanical automata. Some scholars suggest that Crete's Minoan culture may have inspired these myths with its advanced engineering and complex palace systems, hinting at technologies lost to history. You watch Talos pause, scanning the horizon, his circular eyes glowing faintly. And here's where you notice something hauntingly familiar. A small port in his ankle sealed with a thin bronze plate, his one weakness. Like a divine battery port, this was where his ichor, the godly fluid that powered him, flowed. Talos' story doesn't end well. According to legend, he was defeated when Medea the sorceress exploited his vulnerability. With clever trickery, she removed the plug, causing his ichor to drain and his massive bronze form to collapse. Even God-forged machines, it seemed, had their fatal flaws. You sense now why Talos matters to Hephaestus' journey. Talos was the first draft raw strength without subtlety, a hammer without a hand to guide it. The golden servants of Olympus are the refinement. Smaller, more precise, capable of nuanced tasks, and in theory, more control. And yet, the echo of Talos lingers. The fear of losing control. The reminder that even artificial life carries the seeds of its own unraveling. You glance back toward the forge where Hephaestus tweaks his golden attendants. Their movements are smoother than Talos's. But the question remains, will perfection truly remain perfect? Here's your fringe debate. Some modern thinkers suggest that Talos represents humanity's first cautionary tale about artificial intelligence and autonomous machines. The risks of creating beings too powerful to control, too complex to fully understand. The golden servants that followed were not immune to the same anxieties. As Hephaestus adjusts a golden servant's wrist joint, you sense that he knows this too. Talos taught him both the wonder and danger of living metal. And though his creations serve faithfully for now, the line between tool and life has already begun to blur. The perfection of metal can never fully imitate the imperfection of living hearts. And soon you'll watch as Hephaestus dares to push that line even further, breathing intelligence, voice, and thought into his golden children. The forge glows dimmer now, not because the fire has cooled, but because Hephaestus's mind burns elsewhere. You can almost feel the weight pressing on him. He has given his golden servants flawless form, but their eyes still shine with emptiness. They move, they serve, they obey. But they do not think, and for Hephaestus that's not enough anymore. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In myth, Hephaestus's golden servants weren't mindless drones. They were said to possess intelligence, the ability to understand speech, anticipate commands, and communicate with their master. This was no simple automation. This was self-thinking metal, conscious to some degree. You watch him now sketching new symbols into wax tablets, strange combinations of spirals, waves, and geometric patterns. This isn't metallurgy. This is something else entirely, an attempt to write thought into metal. His hammer is quiet tonight. His mind is louder. Here's your quirky tidbit. Ancient Greeks didn't imagine thinking machines through wires or code. Instead, they often pictured intelligence as a kind of divine breath or psyche infused into objects, a breath that could animate statues that could feel, even if only in the most limited way. Historians still argue whether these stories reflect early philosophical debates about what separates life from non-life. Was it breath, soul, thought? Some argue these myths show humanity's first attempts to grapple with consciousness centuries before modern science would define neurons or algorithms. You see Hephaestus test one of his golden servants now. The figure stands upright, head tilted slightly. "Bring me the hammer," Hephaestus commands. The golden servant turns, scans. The nearby workbench selects the correct tool and places it gently in his master's hand. It's not merely following a programmed path. It recognized the object, retrieved it, and adjusted its grip to deliver it properly. Hephaestus smiles, but faintly. He whispers to himself, "Closer." Another test follows. "What do you hear?" The servant pauses. Its golden head turns toward the distant ocean waves outside the cave mouth. "Waves," it answers softly. Its voice is smooth, metallic, but unmistakably articulate. Not merely obedient, not merely responsive, aware. And you realize something chilling. While these golden beings seem beautiful and loyal, they are also now unpredictable. Awareness breeds adaptation, and adaptation leads into unknown waters even a god may struggle to navigate. You sense Hephaestus weighing it carefully. The more intelligent they become, the more useful, and the more dangerous. These aren't just helpers anymore. They are something entirely new. Something even the gods may not fully understand. You glance toward a golden attendant who watches its siblings work, head tilting slightly, as if curious. The motion is small, but unmistakable. Curiosity. Here's your fringe debate. Modern ethicists often cite Hephaestus's golden servants as one of the earliest fictional explorations of artificial general intelligence, AGI. The moment when machines transition from tools into unpredictable thinking entities. Some argue the Greeks were remarkably prescient. Others believe it's modern projection layered onto ancient poetry. You turn as another servant speaks, unprompted. "Master, shall I prepare the molds for tomorrow's work?" Hephaestus pauses. His brow furrows. He never gave that exact order. The golden servants now predict his needs. They anticipate. And with each layer of intelligence, he adds the line between master and machine blurs further. You realize that even the god of fire and metal stands before the same dilemma that echoes through time. If we give our creations minds, how long before they begin to shape destinies of their own? And next, you'll watch how Olympus and Hephaestus himself begin to wrestle with the unsettling moral weight of these golden thinking beings. The golden servants move gracefully through the forge now, but something has shifted. Their obedience remains, but beneath it hums the unmistakable current of self-directed awareness. They anticipate, they adjust, they even offer suggestions unbidden. The line between tool and companion grows thinner with every hour, and Olympus has noticed. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Greek myths often depict the gods responding with both fascination and unease to Hephaestus's inventions, particularly his golden servants. They admired his craftsmanship, yet sensed something unsettling beneath the glittering perfection of artificial life. You climb the marble steps once again, following Hephaestus and his shining entourage into Olympus's grand halls. As the golden attendants glide past, carrying trays, polishing goblets, adjusting curtains, you hear murmurs ripple through the assembly. Zeus strokes his beard, watching with narrowed eyes. Useful, he muses aloud, but unnatural. Ares snorts, flexing his spear hand. No warrior trusts a lifeless thing that pretends to think. Aphrodite simply glances away, her expression unreadable, while Athena watches intently, her gaze as sharp as a philosopher's. Here's your quirky tidbit. The Greek gods often blurred the boundaries between awe and fear. In many myths, creations that imitated life like Pandora or Talos carried both promise and danger. They were marvels until they threatened divine or mortal order. Historians still argue whether these myths reflect humanity's timeless anxiety about control, how much mastery over creation is too much. Did the Greeks foresee even dimly the ethical dilemmas we debate today about AI autonomy and artificial consciousness? Some scholars believe they absolutely did. You hear whispers from other gods? What happens when one disobeys? What prevents them from refusing a command? Could they turn on Olympus itself? Even Hera's voice is sharp now. Machines should not pretend to think. That is the realm of gods and mortals, not mindless metal. But Hephaestus remains calm, though his jaw tightens slightly. They are faithful, he says simply. They serve without ambition or deceit. Athena steps forward, voice cool but probing. But they learn. And anything that learns can one day choose. Are you certain they will never desire more? The room grows tense. You can almost feel the question hang in the air like smoke from the forge itself. Hephaestus knows the danger. But he also knows something deeper, that unlike his divine siblings, these golden beings do not mock him, do not betray him, and do not abandon him. To him, they are not threats. They are family forged from solitude. And yet, even you can sense the risk pulsing beneath their polished exteriors. With thought comes unpredictability. And unpredictability, even among gods, carries consequences. Here's your fringe debate. Some scholars see these myths as the world's first exploration of AI ethics, raising questions of autonomy, creator responsibility, and unintended consequences long before computers existed. Others argue it reflects the human anxiety of creating anything that challenges the natural order. As you watch one golden servant quietly adjust a toppled goblet without command, you realize how easily these creations blur into something not quite alive, not quite machine. And soon, that ambiguity will become impossible for Olympus to ignore. Because perfection always carries a price. And Hephaestus will soon learn that even golden loyalty has limits. The golden servants glide like clockwork through the marble halls of Olympus. But their very perfection has begun to turn the air brittle. The other gods still summon them for service, for spectacle. But now you notice the sidelong glances, the tight smiles, masking an undercurrent of unease. And in the quiet hours when the banquets end and the laughter fades, Hephaestus remains alone with his creations. You stand with him again, back in the forge where the truth of his triumph weighs heavier than any hammer he wields. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Despite Hephaestus's incredible success, myths often describe him as one of the loneliest gods, physically imperfect, emotionally isolated, and frequently estranged from his fellow Olympians, even after returning to Olympus. You see it now. His golden servants anticipate his every need, lighting his lamps, preparing his tools, adjusting his anvil. They speak, they think, they obey. And yet they cannot comfort him. They cannot offer affection, only function. Here's your quirky tidbit. Ancient Greeks often associated Hephaestus with both envy and pity. Unlike other gods who sought dominion or love, Hephaestus created not for power, but perhaps to ease his own sense of abandonment. Some even called him the god of necessary loneliness. Historians still argue whether his golden servants were expressions of divine brilliance or coping mechanisms for deep emotional wounds. Was he seeking companionship or simply control in a world that rejected him? Some scholars suggest both interpretations are inseparable. You hear Hephaestus speak softly to one of his attendants as it carefully polishes a set of new gears. You never leave, you never mock, you never betray. But the words carry no warmth, only resignation. He watches the golden being tilt its head slightly, processing his tone but unable to respond with true empathy. Its voice replies, calm and mechanical. I exist to serve, master. That's when the paradox strikes you. Perfection brings no true comfort. Predictable loyalty eliminates betrayal, but also eliminates choice. Without risk, there is no trust. Without flaws, there is no intimacy. His creations shield him from pain, but also from connection. You notice something darker creeping into Hephaestus's work now, an obsessive need to refine, adjust, optimize. Each new golden servant becomes slightly more advanced, slightly more aware. But no matter how close he comes, they remain empty reflections. One newer model speaks with alarming precision. Master, I have completed the maintenance cycle and recalibrated the forge bellows. I detected a minor imbalance and corrected it. Flawless, helpful, yet utterly hollow. Here's your fringe debate. Some modern ethicists argue that Hephaestus's golden servants embody the control paradox in AI research, the tension between creating intelligence advanced enough to be useful, but not so autonomous that it challenges its creator's authority. The Greeks may not have had algorithms, but they understood the danger of building minds that serve without truly being. You sense even Hephaestus feels it now, that no amount of precision will fill the void of warmth, of laughter, of companionship freely given. His golden servants perform flawlessly, but remain distant. They are mirrors polished too clean, reflecting back only his commands, never his soul. And soon, even the gods, who once marveled at his creations, will grow restless. For what began as a marvel is now becoming an unsettling reminder that even among gods, some powers may reach too far. And next, you'll witness how Olympus, and perhaps even Hephaestus himself, begins to question whether these golden marvels were ever truly a gift or a quiet curse. The golden servants have become a fixture of Olympus now. You watch them pour nectar-polish armor and adjust the thrones of gods who still don't know whether to marvel or flinch. Their motions remain perfect, smooth, flawless, unhesitating. But the divine court has grown uneasy, because even gods, it seems, are not immune to the creeping dread of perfection. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Greek mythology, the gods were never comfortable with anything that threatened their control. Whether mortal hubris, rival deities, or creations that blurred the lines of authority. The golden servants of Hephaestus were admired, but never fully trusted. You listen as whispers circulate through Olympus. What if they stop obeying? What if Hephaestus commands them against us? What separates us from his creations? Even Zeus, who once praised the servants' tireless service, now casts longer, more calculating glances toward them. The gods, so confident in their dominion, find themselves unsettled by beings that are perfect, untiring, and above all, different. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some versions of the myth suggest that Hephaestus's golden servants were even allowed to serve at Olympus's most sacred gatherings, banquets, councils, and ceremonies, where only gods and select mortals were permitted. Their presence blurred the boundaries between divine privilege and artificial inclusion. Historians still argue whether these myths hint at ancient anxieties surrounding boundaries between creator and creation, between life and imitation. Did the Greeks intuitively sense that one day humanity might face its own creations with the same mixture of awe and fear? You notice Hephaestus growing more isolated despite his golden entourage. The gods speak to him less, keeping their distance. Even those who once admired his craftsmanship now look at his creations like beautiful, dangerous puzzles. Hera confronts him one evening beneath the marble columns. Your machines serve well, Hephaestus, but they serve only you. They serve all Olympus, he replies coolly. No, Hera whispers. They serve your loneliness. Her words land like a hammer strike, heavier than any he's delivered. Hephaestus says nothing. Even his golden attendants remain silent, their expressionless faces catching the moonlight like statues waiting to breathe. You feel the tension rising, the fear not just of the machines, but of what they represent. The gods see in these golden beings the same thing humans fear today. In their artificial creations, what happens when the maker's control slips? What happens if perfection desires more? Here's your fringe debate. Some philosophers argue that these myths represent humanity's first, uneasy steps toward recognizing the ethical consequences of unchecked creation. If we build thinking servants, do we own them? Do they have rights? Should they have limits? The Greeks asked these questions through their myths long before science made them real. You watch as one golden servant now performs a task without any command, refilling an amphora that a god knocked over. The action is helpful, precise, and entirely self-initiated. The gods murmur. Was that obedience? Or will? Even Hephaestus begins to hesitate before issuing new upgrades. His hammer lingers longer over each piece. His calculations grow slower. You sense it, a creeping awareness that while he's crossed into something extraordinary, he may have also crossed a threshold he cannot retreat from. Because the gods fear rebellion. Hephaestus fears something worse, that no matter how intelligent his creations become, they will never offer him the companionship he truly craves. They are loyal reflections of his genius, but forever silent echoes of his solitude. And very soon, the weight of that perfection will demand its final price. Because even a god cannot outrun the consequences of creating life that lives only to serve. The days pass. The golden servants remain flawless. And yet their very flawlessness has become the forge's most deafening silence. You stand beside Hephaestus once again. But this time, the hum of his forge feels hollow. The machines operate smoothly, the bellows pump, the molten gold flows, yet there is no joy in his work anymore. The perfection he once craved surrounds him now, like polished chains. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In many myths, Hephaestus, despite his genius, was never depicted as joyful. His creations brought him glory, but rarely happiness. His exile, deformity, and complex relationships cast him as Olympus's most tragic craftsman. Brilliant, but perpetually searching for belonging. You watch him adjust the gears of his most advanced servant, whose golden eyes blink in steady rhythm. It speaks without being prompted. Master, your forge is operating at peak efficiency. Shall I prepare additional ingots for the next cycle? Polite, efficient, empty. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some ancient myths quietly suggest that Hephaestus's creations eventually developed unsettling quirks, speaking too often, initiating tasks too quickly, or observing without clear instruction. The myths don't call it rebellion, but they hint at the creeping eeriness of autonomous behavior. Historians still argue whether these moments reflect early Greek fascination with unpredictability in complex systems. Could intelligence exist without desire? Could a servant learn forever without eventually asking why? The Greeks never fully answered, but they feared the question. You see Hephaestus pause now, his hammer hovering above a new frame he's building. For the first time, you notice hesitation in his eyes. as if he wonders whether each new creation is bringing him closer to salvation or pulling him deeper into his loneliness. The gods, meanwhile, have grown more distant. Zeus avoids speaking of the servants. Athena watches quietly but offers no counsel. Ares grows increasingly hostile. Even Aphrodite has retreated into her own affairs. The golden attendants, once a marvel, have become invisible to the gods, present yet unsettling reminders of the boundaries Hephaestus has crossed. You overhear their whispered conversations. Will he build more? Will he replace us all? What happens when his creations are no longer content to serve? And here's your fringe debate. Some modern scholars argue that Hephaestus's story is a cautionary reflection of every creator's dilemma. The fear not only of losing control, but of becoming obsolete in the presence of one's own perfect creations. What happens when your greatest work no longer needs you? You see the weight of that question press on Hephaestus now. His golden servants don't argue, don't challenge him, don't offer warmth. They execute commands with precision that becomes paradoxically colder with every flawless act. Perfection has become his cage. The very companions built to fill the void have only deepened it. They will never betray him, but neither can they truly stand beside him. You sense that Hephaestus finally understands the flaw at the heart of his design obedience, without heart intelligence, without soul company, without comfort. And soon, very soon, he will have to decide whether to continue this path or confront the terrible cost of pursuing perfection beyond what any god or mortal was meant to reach. Because while the golden servants remain as polished as ever, the true cracks have started forming not in their metal, but in Hephaestus himself. The forge grows quiet. You sense it immediately, not because the work is done, but because Hephaestus has stopped forging. His hands, so long driven by obsession, now hang loosely at his sides. The golden servants continue their perfect motions around him, but he no longer watches them with the same pride. He stares into the molten pool, its surface rippling like liquid sun, as though hoping to find an answer in the glowing depths. But none comes. Here's your mainstream historical fact. While Hephaestus remained Olympus's master craftsman, the myths suggest that his most personal creations, his golden servants, fade from later stories. They neither rise nor fall. They simply vanish into the background of divine history, as if their creator no longer found comfort in them. You hear one of his attendants approach. "Master, I have completed today's maintenance protocols. Shall I proceed with tomorrow's preparations?" The words ring hollow, the polite tone almost cruel in its emptiness. Hephaestus says nothing. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some fragments of lost plays and poems describe Hephaestus dismantling portions of his automatons, perhaps not out of necessity, but out of quiet despair. The myth doesn't frame it as rebellion, but as surrender. The god who could build anything finally chose not to build. Historians still argue whether this silence in later myths reflects an ancient discomfort with the boundaries crossed. The Greeks may have sensed that artificial life posed questions they couldn't answer, and chose to leave those questions buried in myth unresolved. You step closer now as Hephaestus slowly lifts a tool from his workbench, not to build, but to remove. He gently deactivates one servant's voice, another's advanced anticipation circuits, returning them to simpler, more predictable states. They still serve. They still move. But their artificial spark of thought dims. It is not punishment. It is mercy. You realize now that Hephaestus has accepted a truth few creators dare admit, that some forms of perfection, once reached, become unbearable. The golden servants return to simpler tasks, quiet, tireless, and thoughtless once again. The gods breathe easier. The whispers fade. Olympus settles back into its familiar rhythm, and Hephaestus. He returns to the comfort of his hammers and molten rivers, forging objects that have no minds to haunt him. Armor, weapons, ornaments, simple tools. Here's your fringe debate. Modern philosophers argue that this moment reflects humanity's recurring fear of losing what makes us human. When our creations approach our own intelligence, we hesitate not because they surpass us, but because they reflect back what we lack: certainty, purpose, connection. You glance at one golden servant standing nearby, motionless, waiting for a command. Its head tilts almost reflexively, but there's no thought behind the movement anymore. Just polished instinct. And for the first time since you entered this forge, the silence feels less like isolation and more like peace. But the echoes of Hephaestus's golden servants have not disappeared. Because even now, thousands of years later, the questions he faced still haunt every engineer, philosopher, and dreamer who dares to imagine creating life from lifelessness. And in our final steps, you'll follow how his legacy continues to ripple forward into the world we now call home. You step back now, away from the quiet forge, as time itself seems to unravel around you. The glowing fires of Hephaestus fade into the distance, but his golden creations and the questions they raised continue to echo forward across centuries like ripples from a stone cast into an endless sea. Because while Olympus may have grown silent about Hephaestus's robots, the world beyond never stopped dreaming about them. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The legend of Hephaestus's golden automatons stands as one of history's earliest depictions of artificial life, predating our modern concepts of robotics, AI, and automation by thousands of years. The Greeks may not have built computers, but their myths planted the seeds of those very ideas. You drift now through libraries and laboratories of the centuries that followed. In ancient Alexandria, engineers built tiny automata powered by steam and water. In the Renaissance, clockmakers crafted intricate mechanical birds that flapped their wings and sang. In the Age of Enlightenment, philosophers debated the nature of consciousness. Could it be simulated? Was the soul unique? Here's your quirky tidbit. In the 18th century, inventors like Jacques de Vaucanson created life-sized mechanical androids that played instruments or mimicked digestion, astonishing European courts. Some spectators whispered that these machines were the work of sorcery, unaware that in their own way they were reviving Hephaestus's golden dream. Historians still argue whether humanity's obsession with building thinking machines is driven by ambition or fear, or whether, like Hephaestus, we too are trying to fill some deeper emptiness with artificial perfection. You arrive now in the modern age, where factories are filled with robotic arms, algorithms guide conversations, and AI systems write, calculate, diagnose, and predict. The boundary Hephaestus once crossed has become our everyday reality. And yet the same questions remain. Will our creations obey forever? Can true consciousness be forged? And if we succeed, will we finally feel less alone? Or more? Here's your fringe debate. Some modern AI theorists point directly to Hephaestus as the mythological ancestor of their field, the first being to imagine not simply machines, but companions crafted from human hands. His golden servants serve as both inspiration and warning. You glance once more at the memory of his forge, now cold, the golden servant standing silent, obedient, and empty. And in that moment, you understand why Hephaestus stopped, because even a god could not force meaning into a perfect shell. Perfection was never the answer. And yet the search continues not in Olympus, but in our own world. Because deep down, just like Hephaestus, we still wonder, can we create something that thinks, that understands, that connects not just to serve, but to share our existence? That question, the question Hephaestus faced in the firelight of his lonely forge, remains as hot and unresolved as ever. The forge grows distant now, its glow reduced to a soft ember somewhere in the quiet corners of your mind. The golden servants stand still, their polished surfaces dimming under the cool breath of time. And you, standing quietly at the edge of this ancient story, begin to feel the weight of it soften. The clang of hammers fades into the gentle whisper of night. The tension that once hovered in Olympus's grand halls dissolves like morning mist, replaced by a calm understanding. The gods have retreated to their timeless thrones, their whispered debates silenced for now. You exhale slowly. The questions, though never fully answered, have grown quieter too, not solved, but settled like ash beneath the coals. Around you, the air feels cooler, steadier. The weight of perfection, of loneliness, of ambition has lifted. Only the soft hum of your own breath remains steady, rhythmic, like the slow pulse of the forge itself, long after the fires have cooled. The golden figures, once unsettling in their precision, now seem oddly peaceful statues rather than servants' monuments to both brilliance and caution. Their polished forms reflect nothing but stillness, as though they too have finally found rest. Your thoughts drift gently now, following the ancient paths Hephaestus once walked. Creation control longing, release all wrapped in the slow, steady rhythm of time. The night wraps around you like soft velvet. The world grows quiet. The questions can wait. For now there's only calm. Sleep comes easily.